Yeah, windowless.
Yeah.
I think we've got all the windows in this room now.
Yeah. All the windows.
We've got them on behalf of everyone.
We're good on windows.
So yeah, given it's hot as Ibiza in Liverpool today. Yeah.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
It's been today.
Yeah, I know, right? I know. I always say to my friends, oh, but you've got to support it. Thanks. They'll be sorry when things start really kicking off on climate change in the south.
Yeah, if you're not underwater, of course.
Brilliant. Okay. Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to IPPR North's last event of conference season. So it's a big one for us, and we're delighted to have you here at the Museum of Liverpool. Of course, it's been a few days of big announcements by Labour on the regional rebalancing, as we now call it, agenda and devolution. We had Angela Rayner speaking on Sunday night, giving her version of what the good life looks like for people and places across the country, talking to the housing and transport agendas in particular. We had the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, yesterday making clear that we're going to have to move to a higher investment economy in order to make progress. And then just last night, you may have seen the leader, Keir Starmer's speech has been trailed in the papers, and there's going to be a clear focus on devolution, both the rollout of the Mayoral Combined Authority model, greater bus franchising to the local authority level, as well as to the combined authority tier, and also, of course, the news around GB Power and community power. So some really welcome focus on this agenda, which, let's say, at other party conferences hasn't been spoken about so loudly. So I'm really pleased to see the full force of the Shadow Cabinet and the Shadow Ministers and Metro Mayors behind this agenda. Now, we've got an incredible panel for you this morning, not one but two Shadow Ministers. I'm really delighted to have you both here. We have Paula Barker, who's, I'm very pleased to say, a fellow Liverpool dweller. We've got three out of 7 on the panel today living in Liverpool, so I'm delighted. We've got the home crowd showing out, who is, of course, the Shadow Minister for Devolution and the English Regions. We also have Justin Madders MP, who is Shadow Minister for Business, Employment Rights and Levelling Up, so not too broad a brief at all. And of course, we'll need no introduction, Metro Mayor Steve Rotherham of Liverpool City Region, who's a close friend of IPPR North. And we're delighted to do this event in partnership this morning with our friends at Power to Change, and we have Nick Plum here, who's Associate Director of Policy and Insight, to join us on the panel this morning, as well as Bright Blue, and we have their chair, Executive Chair, Ryan Shorthouse, on the panel with us too. So a really stellar panel. In terms of how this morning is going to play out, now that I've introduced the panel and given you a bit of the headlines as to what we're hearing, I'm going to hand over to each of the panellists in turn to do about 5 minutes opening remarks and reflections on where they think the regional rebalancing agenda has got to. I noticed the title of this session has the words that we don't use anymore in it, levelling up, which shows how quickly things are changing in politics at the moment, because I think I signed off this brief about 3 months ago. Just in terms of other housekeeping, teas and coffees at the back, please feel free to get up and help yourself throughout the session. It is Tuesday at conference after all. And also to say that this event is being live streamed and recorded. In terms of, once we've heard from our speakers, we'll do a bit of panel Q&A reflecting on some of the things we've heard before opening up to you. So please do be cooking up your questions as we're speaking and hearing from the speakers. But without further ado, Paula, may I first hand over to you?
Thanks very much, Zoe, and it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you all to my home city of Liverpool. I hope you're all having a wonderful time and enjoying the very best that our fantastic city has to offer. I've been in the post for about 4 weeks, I think, so I've got devolution all sorted. No, on a serious note, it's an enormous privilege to be asked to head up devolution and English Regions. But as you would imagine, it is a very big brief with levels of complexity. So I will be spending the coming months ahead really trying to get to grips with it and to bottom out what real devolution means to the English regions and how it will look and what really should be in place. Prior to that, I had the brief for homelessness and rough sleeping, and my good friend Mike Amesbury has took up that mantle and has been gifted about 80 or 90 policies, so now I have to start all over again. And I'm really glad to be working on some of the levelling up issues with my good mate, Justin, as well. So I think in terms of the last Labour government, we've got a proud record of establishing in all the nations of the UK outside England. And when we had the failed referendum in 2004 for the North East, the English question was really left alone. And levelling up only really entered the political lexicon in recent years, but the concept began in earnest really with the Conservatives' plans to devolve power to English city regions. And I think where it has had success is where the economic and the constitutional has gone hand in hand. And we see very real examples of that here in Liverpool with our fantastic Metro Mayor Steve Rotherham. And Zoe has just mentioned about Keir's speech today and about the bus franchising. On Friday, I was privileged to join Steve as he took back control of our buses here in the city region, just down the M62. Our other wonderful Metro Mayor, Andy Barham, not quite as wonderful as Steve, it has to be said, but, you know, he's a pretty decent bloke, although he is a bloke. He's doing an absolutely fantastic job in Manchester as well. But where the Tory government has, well, I mean, I was going to say where the Tory government has abjectly failed on devolution, it's failed on so many levels, to be perfectly honest, is to create a lasting legacy that will truly tackle regional inequalities that are deeply entrenched in our communities. And we will see an end to the Hunger Games style pots of funding, which has been an absolute disgrace up and down the country, and as we know only too well, has mainly gone to Tory shires. So I'm going to stop there, I think, and not rabbit on too much, and I'll let other colleagues come in, and then I can add to the comments later, if that's okay.
Fabulous, yeah, of course. Thank you very much for those opening remarks. I'd be really keen to come back later to this question of like consent for devolution. You mentioned the referendum, and I think it's been a hot topic in Liverpool too, so I'm keen to come back to that. Justin, may I hand over to you for your opening remarks?
Thank you. Yeah, so as you've already mentioned in the introduction, I have a pretty broad brief, business, employment rights and levelling up, and I think it's fair to say that if you want to truly level up, you've got to get the business investment, you've got to get people's work to be paid properly and have security in it, but you've also got to remember the communities around it. So that, you know, at the end of a period of Labour government, we want people to be proud of the communities they live in, see the investment that's been delivered, and have security in the workplace as well. Those things are not going to happen overnight, we understand that, but that's the driving mission. And I think the sort of title of the session, you know, rebooting, levelling up, is an interesting one, because like you, I've been thinking about why would we continue to use a phrase that has been so widely discredited, and I came up with a few alternatives. Obviously we've heard regional investment, but I came up with boosting up, town revival, regeneration nation, and you can go on, but actually that's the point, isn't it? You can label these things whatever you want, but if you don't actually deliver, it doesn't matter what they're called. And I think that we have more than enough evidence from the last few years to be certain that levelling up is a slogan without any substance. So to announce a fund which hundreds and hundreds of towns haven't been able to access at all goes completely against the spirit of levelling up. And again, there is a suspicion, shall we say, that some of the allocations have been targeted at people they might want to help at the next election, and we know that we've had this before with the Towns Fund, and no doubt we will do some more analysis to see whether our suspicions prove to be well-founded. And speaking as someone who represents the constituency in Ellesmere Port that lost out in the original Towns Fund, we've been following this very closely, and pleased to say we actually got a levelling up bid approved in the last application round. It was about the 5th time of asking, and you can just imagine how much officer time and money has been spent in developing those bids. And of course, we were successful. There are many local authorities that have put in a lot of resources trying to achieve a bid that has not been granted. And I think, you know, we've been successful because we basically put in a bid that Whitehall have asked for. We're being dictated by Whitehall about what their priorities are for the community, not ours, and that's how we've managed to get to a successful bid. So a good example of that is this latest bid is going to spend a lot of money on cycle lanes. Now, today's not the day to debate the merits of cycle lanes, but I think if I asked my constituents whether having cycle lanes past rows of boarded up shops is really going to regenerate the town centre, they may have a different view. But unfortunately, we're in this situation where London knows best. So we've got the money and we'll make the best of it. But I think the fact that we are being essentially driven in a direction as to how we spend that is not genuine levelling up, it's not genuine devolution. So, as Paul has already alluded to, we will be completely changing the mindset with our Taking Back Control Act. And I think, you know, as she said, the Hunger Games style, pitting communities against each other is a road to nowhere. It's a race to the bottom. And I think, as I said already, if we tie up workers' rights to strengthening the economy, business investment, genuine regeneration across the whole community, we will have been a successful Labour government. And I think at the moment there is, even in terms of what this government decide, can be devolved a huge degree of dictation, which doesn't do anyone any favours. I think Steve has done a fantastic job in making the most of that in the Liverpool City region, and he's absolutely right to focus on public transport. One of the biggest bugbears my constituents have is the lack of availability of buses, and then they see 5 miles down the road much better public transport options. They would love to be able to have that same choice, but unfortunately we don't have the powers. And in Cheshire we have been asking to get more powers and control over our destiny, but we are told that unless we have an elected mayor, there will be no deal on the table, or there will be a deal with significantly reduced powers. And the fact that Cheshire is not Merseyside, it's not got that same centre in it. I just don't think it's the right model for a mayoral model. And we have actually excellent council leaders who already do a fantastic job on dwindling resources. I think having a whole debate about where you would base this new centre, who it would be, is an unnecessary distraction to a system that is already doing well. So we don't think that kind of dictation from the centre is actually the way to genuinely level up. It should be a real ground-up approach where local areas get to decide and ask for the powers that they want. And what we will do under our Taking Back Control Act is basically give local areas the power to ask for any responsibilities that are already devolved in another area of the country. So we can go through that whole list. We know there's an awful lot of them. And I think there are some suggestions that we'll be going further in actually giving mayors power to get involved in strategic planning issues, possibly even getting into house building, because you know we know your housing needs don't stop at the local authority border. It's a good idea to be looking at one of those critical issues that we face, which is a lack of affordable housing in this country. And I think giving local communities greater powers and resources to actually deliver on that need will make a huge difference to the country. So there's a lot in there, a lot to do, but I think that we're definitely in the right direction.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Justin. And it'll be really interesting maybe to come back in discussion. I'm really interested in your reflections on Cheshire and actually how they've, you know, I know there's not the same kind of momentum behind having a mayoral model there, but what should be in its place. And I'm also really interested in this tension between, well, maybe you don't see it as a tension, but places kind of saying what they want from devolution, but at the same time sort of reconciling that with national strategies, whether that's about like green industrial strategy and how then you kind of pair that up with what places want to be doing. So perhaps that's a question we can come back to in the discussion. Steve, may I come to you? Tell us what this looks like and what this is feeling like from a Liverpool City region perspective.
Well, you'll know, and hopefully people here will know that from day one, I've said that levelling up was phony. It was never about levelling up the country. It was a way in which the Tories could pretend that they were doing something for areas that had been left behind for far too long. And so I'm glad to see the terminology consigned to the dustbin of history, but not the principle. And hopefully what we will see now is a genuine attempt at rebalancing the economy and rebalancing the country. Because if you break it down, what do we actually mean by levelling up and everything else that Justin said that we've used as terminology in the past? And for me, it's about releasing the straitjacket of Whitehall and Westminster and providing the opportunities for local areas to unleash the latent potential of those areas. And look, Westminster and Whitehall can't do that. It's a monolith. It's a huge machine. It's never going to be nimble enough to quickly respond to demands in local areas. And I think that the scale by which you can do some of those great things is greater than a local authority level, but less than it was mentioned about the regional authorities, you know, the Northwest Regional Development Agency. I think it's less than that, and it's about right that you have a combined authority, you have a number of local councils wanting to work together so that the synergies between those areas start to make some sense, and the scale is about the right size to manage those expectations. So for me, you know, I had a seat in Liverpool Walton, and at that time it was the safest seat in the whole country. And people say to me, well, why did you give up the safest seat in the whole country? And that's because I genuinely believe in devolution. We are the most politically centralised democracy in the OECD, and yet we have the most unbalanced economy in the whole of Europe. And I don't think that those two things are separate. I think they're intrinsically linked. And that's because it's always been a London-centric view of the world down in Westminster. And not just the politicians. If you think about the people who service the Palace of Westminster, they don't live in Leeds or in Liverpool or in Manchester. They live in the M25 corridor. So they see things through the prism of what's best for the South and South East. So to break that monopoly, I think devolution's been fantastic. And I would say that the innovation that you're starting to see, not just in politics, but in economies, is happening. I just want to embarrass that person who just kicked that, because she's like, oh no, did anybody hear that? Yeah, we did. But that's it. It's all right, you're kicking cups. We're used to cups in Liverpool. Yeah, so I think that all of the great things that you're starting to see, the germane of them is starting with local areas starting to speak to each other and then coming up with great ideas. And look, we haven't got the monopoly on this. And I was just saying, just prior to this, it's great for once that somewhere like Liverpool and the Liverpool City region is ahead of the game, because for those decades and generations about being picked on by Tory governments after Tory governments, by being hit the hardest by cuts, by austerity biting deeper than anywhere else. I mean, cumulatively, our local authorities have had the greatest cuts anywhere. That's not by accident. That's a deliberate policy. And yet we've got a chance now with devolution to do better for ourselves. But being a good socialist, I don't believe it should be just areas like the Liverpool City region or Greater Manchester or West Yorkshire. Everybody should have the opportunity to have devolution. You will find that nearly every decision, other than national security and big set pieces, health, for instance, they're better taken at a local level than somebody who couldn't point on a map to where Kirby and West Kirby are. They wouldn't know the difference between that. But it's better that local people have influence over their decisions, and that's what we're doing. And I don't just believe in devolution. I believe, do you remember double devolution? I believe in subsidiarity. Yeah, I believe trying to get down to the lowest level, the most granular level that you possibly can, and then you have proper democratic feedback and input into policy making. So that's what I'd like to see next.
Thanks so much, Steve. Perhaps something for us to come back in the discussion. I'd love to talk about accountability and how you're feeling about the government's current proposals about MPs scrutinising metro
Bring it
mayors.
on.
I think bring it on. Okay, there we go. In sum, we're doing well. We're almost at 11 o'clock and no one's mentioned HS2, but maybe that will come up in questions. Ryan, hot off the heels of Conservative conference, what are you thinking and Bright Blue thinking about this agenda, and will it, for the Conservatives, will it outlast being in government, or is this something that was a good idea while it lasted?
Great. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for the partnership with IPPR North. We did the same event at Conservative Party conference, and we did it the year before as well. And last week I wore my bright blue shoes, and today I'm wearing my bright red shoes. So hopefully I fit in at Labour conference wearing these shoes. And
I've got blue shoes on.
Good. Well, cross-party support. And you've got magazines about bright blue on your chairs. Please do take those away with you. Hopefully, after you've heard me speak, you won't throw them at me. But please do take them. And we see our mission as a think tank to defend and improve liberal society. Look, I think levelling up is a noble ambition which deserves cross-party long-term focus. And my plea to the Labour Party is don't do what the Tories did when they came into power in 2010 and dismantled some of the successful initiatives like Sure Start Children's Centres, New Deal for Communities, for example, which actually take a long time. You need to be patient with these sorts of initiatives to yield the results. And actually with Sure Start, it did take some time, but actually the later evidence did suggest that it was quite effective. And hence now, you see with the Tory government in the later years, family hubs, which are basically children's centre, much more focus on that. The Levelling Up Fund, which is really just a sort of rehash of the New Deal for Communities, not the same level of funding as what we saw in the noughties, but is the same sort of principle. So it's taken them some time to get to the things that the Labour government were doing in the noughties. So I hope it's not abandoned in that way. Look, I agree with the panellists that levelling up is nothing new. Since the late 60s, there's been lots of regeneration initiatives, countless initiatives. The evidence around them is that they can have an impact, a positive impact, marginal but positive, but it takes some time, and you have to wait for that over many years and decades. The main difference for those so-called left-behind areas tends to be the level of private and public sector investment into those areas in terms of transforming outcomes. And of course, levelling up is really what the very purpose of government should be, which is to step in where the market is failing or not delivering in certain areas. It's the role of government to come in and support those areas. And my own view of the Conservative government is, despite promising some uniqueness to the levelling up agenda, which I think was twofold, the first was a focus not just on economic regeneration, but social regeneration, the social fabric, the sense of livable places. And the second was ladders for the whole community, not just for particular individuals, not just about Billy Elliot, but the town from where Billy Elliot came from, raising up the whole town. I thought that was the right focus conceptually, but that hasn't really been delivered on, admittedly. And, in essence, so far, the levelling up agenda has mainly been targets, or what they call so-called missions by 2030, and pockets of funding. So they're like the single regeneration budget we had under the Tories in the 90s, and they're like the New Deal that we had in the noughties, albeit with less funding. I think there has been some positives lately. For example, the new 20 million endowment for 55 towns, which was announced just before Conservative Party conference. I think that was well targeted. It's going to be a community-led scheme, and it's less politicised in the decision making. Obviously, some people still feel and have suspicions around it, but I think it's less politicised than the levelling up funding and the way that's been dished out. And, being honest, I think there hasn't been substantial progress on levelling up. If you look at the state of private incomes and public services, which are key to the missions by 2030, we haven't seen progress. We've seen a stagnation or a decline. And the attainment gap, I think the one area where we have seen some progress in the last 13 years is around attainment. Unfortunately, that attainment gap has gone into reverse because of the pandemic, but there was some closure before that. So look, I recognise there hasn't been progress, but I still think it's the right thing to do, and I hope the Labour government continue with it, but have some changes. And I would suggest 4 things. The first is, at the heart, I think, of transforming these so-called left-behind areas is about talent, to lead local initiatives and ventures in those communities. Michael Gove talked about people staying local but going far. And I think it's about identifying and supporting talent, attracting and retaining talent, where you having it, grabbing it by its horns and making sure that those people and those groups are empowered. So thinking about how we do that, what are the kind of monetary and non-monetary incentives that we might give to people? Supplements, for example, for key workers to live in those so-called left-behind areas. The government have started to do that with teachers. Could they go much further? New honours for local heroes, making sure there's something much more established there. Local accelerator schemes to support new ventures. Can we have a much more localised version of that? Lots in London, there's lots of tech entrepreneurs who are starting through accelerator schemes. Can we do something different with local accelerator schemes as well? So that's the first thing. The second is, I welcome Keir Starmer's progress on more devolution, the announcements today. I've been going to party conferences for a hell of a long time. I feel quite exhausted by it now. But every time I've come to Manchester, to Birmingham and Liverpool, where they have strong mayors, I can see the cities have really been booming in recent times. I can see the change, and no doubt the mayors are part of that. And I think the announcements today of spreading the mayoral combined authorities much wider is much welcome. But I think 2 things, if we're going to have more devolution. I think it's not just about more rights for those areas, but more responsibilities as well. And I do want to look at fiscal devolution as well, and tax-raising powers that local authorities should have, and it makes sense to go to that as well. And the second as well is how you get talented people. I think this is happening much more in terms of who's working for local and combined authorities, but how you attract talent to those institutions as well. So people aren't just attracted to go to the fast stream, for example, in central government, but how can you attract people to local government as well? I think a third area, which I think is very promising, is around Keir Starmer's announcements around new towns and new quarters, new Georgian quarters. And look, I think Starmer's pitch, the tone is right. This idea of, a renaissance, more ambitious, getting Britain building. I think the HS2 announcement, the costs of HS2 are totally out of control. But I think the public will just think, look, it's another example of the Tories being unable to deliver. And the tone of Starmer today, I think, is right about building much more and getting things done and having a renaissance. So I think that's a good dividing line. I think the other dividing line, and I can see that you're wanting me to stop, the other dividing line is also this sort of war on the motorist. Actually, I think what we want in a lot of left behind areas is, yes, to support people who drive, but also livable areas. So I think Labour should get on the front foot and have much more of a kind of pro stance on pedestrianised zones, on livable streets, on 20-mile-an-hour zones. You know, just out here, just a minute ago, I heard children laughing and playing. I think that's an amazing sound, and we want that in many more areas. So actually, I think Labour should be on the front foot against the Tories on that as well. And then finally, just very quickly, 2 sentences. It's not just about the role that government can play, but also private sector investment. So I hope Labour thinks about that and thinks about, you know, whether it's free ports or growth zones or whatever, what you can do to attract private sector investment and particularly entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ryan. And far from wanting you to stop, I was kind of thinking, God, we're developing some sort of cross-party consensus right here. You know, I think good to hear that you're picking the good as well from what Keir Starmer's saying. May I just put you on the spot and just ask, if the next government is a Labour government and Paula and Justin enter Whitehall, what one thing from the last, well, you can argue about how long Levelling Up's been around, but from the last 5 years of Levelling Up, would you urge them to keep from the government's current agenda?
Good question. Well, I think the latest announcement on the Towns Fund is good. I also think on education, free schools, academisation, which wasn't pitched as part of the Levelling Up agenda, but is essential to it. I hope they turbocharge that.
Okay, thank you. And last but by no means least, Nick, our partners from Power to Change, what's it looking like from your perspective, and what would you be urging our leaders here on the panel to be taking forward next?
Thanks, Zoe. So just a little bit about Power to Change. We're an independent social change organisation and work with community business, so locally rooted, locally accountable organisations. And we're really pleased to be in Liverpool. It's a real kind of hotbed of community business activity. So organisations like Safe Regeneration in Bootle, that's done fantastic work in that area, turning around the community there. Home Baked, which has supplied the pies for Labour conference. And Love Wavertree, an organisation in Paula's constituency that's doing fantastic work transforming the high street. And also kind of underpinning all of this, we've done work with Steve Rotherham on Kindred, a social investment, community-led social investment vehicle in the region, which has helped kind of support these community businesses to play that role, the role that they do in kind of transforming their local places. So I guess today I want to talk about the kind of community-led levelling up, or the role of communities in this agenda. I think it's important to note we've had a lot of debate on the terminology, but all the polling, and we're doing some work with More in Common at the moment, shows that levelling up still matters. Whatever you call it, that kind of need for regional rebalancing is likely to be a key factor in how almost half of people, in determining how almost half of people will vote in the upcoming general election. But clearly it needs a reset. And I think for the Labour Party, this should be as much about relearning levelling up as resetting levelling up. So Ryan's spoken about things like the New Deal for communities, and I think that the party should really be looking to its legacy of neighbourhood renewal, New Deal for communities, and see the potential in a community-powered levelling up reset. And for Power to Change, we see community businesses being kind of really ready to help government deliver this. I think that one of the kind of focuses of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves' speech yesterday was really on that mission-focused government and need for partnership between government and often the kind of the conversation is around partnership with big business at the national level, but I also think that partnership needs to be at the local level with community-led businesses too. They're ready to work with government. But to enable this, I think we need to see kind of real change on powers, resources, and backing for community-led businesses to play a role in levelling up. And just a few things to kind of highlight the role that they're already playing. So community businesses operate in some of the trickiest areas where markets feel broken. So Ryan talked about the need to kind of step in when the market isn't working. So community businesses, 48% of community businesses operate in the 30% most disadvantaged areas of England. They create decent jobs, so 86% of staff live locally, and disproportionately employ people that have experienced long-term unemployment. And there's also a local kind of economic multiplier that community businesses provide. So we've done some research which shows that 56p in the pound that they spend stays in the local economy compared to 40p in the pound for large private businesses. So again, there's something thinking about how you keep some of that wealth circulating locally, I think is really important. And I think that really comes back to one of the tensions that's been at the heart of levelling up throughout the past 4 years, which is around the need to rebalance within regions as well as between regions. So I think the regional rebalancing is really important, but also recognising that there are particular pockets of deprivation within regions that needs a slightly different approach. And I think that Steve mentioned the importance of being really ground up and double devolution, and that's absolutely the way to kind of tackle that imbalance within regions. So just before I finish, a couple of things about some of the things that a Labour government could do. So I mentioned powers, and Justin, you mentioned the Take Back Control Bill. Something that Power to Change, alongside lots of other organisations in this room, have been campaigning for is a Community Power Act, so new rights for communities at the neighbourhood level, which would give them control over spaces, services, so lots of community businesses playing a role in the delivery and design of public services, giving communities new rights to do that more systematically, and indeed to control certain forms of investment. The final thing that I just want to mention from a resources point of view, and again, coming back to that point about kind of partnership and the way in which private investment can be brought into this debate. So it was a key theme in Rachel Reeves' speech yesterday, was how government can leverage private investment. One of the ideas that we've had is for a British high street investment vehicle. So this is the idea that community-led organisations are doing that job of tackling vacancy. They're filling those spaces. They're creating that destination that brings people into the town centre. And we think there could be a fund developed with some government underwriting and private investment that would help more of those spaces kind of be a part of this picture.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Now, I'm just going to chat to the panel for about 5-10 minutes before coming to you for your questions, so please do start cooking those up. If I may take advantage of the fact that we have 2 shadow ministers as well as a Metro Mayor on the panel, I'm really interested about the relationship between central government and Metro Mayors, now that Metro Mayors are such a feature of devolution and hopefully a sort of long-standing feature of devolution in the country. What do you think, or how do you think Metro Mayors should be played into central government and central government decision-making differently to now? It kind of feels like at the moment it's still a little bit governance by WhatsApp group, whereas I'm wondering whether really Metro Mayors should be better brought around the table at the central government level. Maybe we could come to you, Paula and Justin, before coming to you, Steve, to see what you think on that. Or you've got to go and say, well, could you come maybe in on that question then?
I'll come in. Sorry about that. I've got to go. I've got to get back into the secure zone as well. So I think, first of all, I'd love to be able to recognise the sort of philosophical critique of what levelling up was about. But I honestly didn't. I didn't know, for instance, that there were missions. I didn't know there were targets. I didn't know that there was a focus. I didn't know that it was genuinely about trying to get those regional disparities sorted out, and I'll tell you for why. Because the reality is that areas like Highton, for instance, in Knowsley, bid in 4 times for levelling up funding, but the former Chancellor, Sadiq Javid's constituency got 100 and something pounds per head of population. And then the current Prime Minister's constituency got, I think it was a 40 million or 80 million, somebody will text, but a huge sum of money. And yet, one of the 10 top priority areas, Highton, got £0, 0 pence. So it was never really about that. It was obviously a mechanism by which the distribution could be clouded in the rhetoric of levelling up. But the reality was that it didn't go to those areas in most need.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, it's there for anyone to see. If you go and have a look at the list of those areas, surprise, surprise, you'll find more Tory doing all right areas than Labour not doing very well areas. So the whole thing, it was a misnomer, really. The thing about how mayoral combined authorities can fit into the future is really important, to tell you the truth, because, again, there was no blueprint for when we came in, so we've all done things slightly differently, and that's why you've got that asymmetric sort of pattern across across England. So we know there's some more mayoral combined authorities that are going to have elected mayors in May.
Yeah.
And I think that takes us to 14, is it? I think it's about 13 or 14, then they'll be across the country. And I think there's a real opportunity then for, hopefully, a future Labour government, when they come in, to hit the ground running. Because what we can do and what we are doing is a lot of the pipeline development. So if Labour announce that they would like to do something on housing, for instance, because I think that's a really big one, council housing, I'd bite your hands off for council housing if we got the chance in the Liverpool City region. But how do we do it? And so we'd need the certainty, wouldn't we, to start to do that planning process, so that when there was funding that was available and you could get some of that for areas, that it doesn't take you then 3 years to spend that money.
Yeah.
And the current system, what happens is, you're right, that it is a beauty contest. We all have to bid in for pots of money, some that we know we're not actually going to win, which is a waste of time and resource and capacity, because we want to get on and deliver what we've already got.
Yeah.
But if we do get those pots of money, we need to ensure that all of the spade work's been done, all of the stuff behind the scenes is all done, so that we can start to see those houses coming out the ground, or the improvements in skills, or other areas doing public transport like we've done it here, or economic growth. Oh, really? Okay, we have to leave the building, unfortunately, everybody.